Well, welcome everyone. This is our third session of Exploring the Sacred. It's one of 4 or 5 evenings of generous listening that we're having, sponsored by the Interfaith Council of Greater Sacramento. And our topic this evening is grace, balance, and growth. My name is David Katz, and I am a retired family physician. I'm also a student of Sufism. I have studied with a Sufi teacher for over 40 years and have very much been gratified by being part of the Interfaith Council of Greater Sacramento. If anyone is interested in joining or thinks their congregation is interested in joining, I would strongly recommend it. And I think our president, Serene, could give you a contact information at the end of our program. So with that, I'd like to frame what we will be doing with this generous listening panel this evening and then introduce the panelist. We will start out with a presentation from each panelist, which will be about 10 minutes long for each of them. Some panelists will be speaking about the topic with audiovisual material, and some will be speaking without. The basis of our panel is that we're listening to each other generously, which means that we're present, we're open-hearted, and non-judgmental. We want to know what the other person, the person who's sharing with us, is experiencing and has experienced, and we want to share our own experiences and be listened to in the same way. So we will not be giving each other advice or having any kind of debates, but we will be listening generously to each other. I'd like to offer an opening prayer before I do the introductions. In the name of God, who is mercy and compassion, we ask that our hearts be open to each other. We ask that what you know is our need at this moment be supplied, and that we keep in our hearts the knowledge that we are constantly being nourished, protected, and sustained by your love. Amen. So first, I'd like to introduce our first panelist who will present to us. Reverend Rajiv Rambab is a pastor at Parkside Community Church in Sacramento. Can you raise your hand, Reverend? There we go. Parkside is a liberal progressive church that's centered in the life and teachings of Jesus and embraces the validity of all spiritual paths. Rajiv works in nonprofits, engaged with anti-poverty and homelessness, and pastored in the Bay Area before moving to the Sacramento area in 2015. Prior, he graduated from the Berkeley School of Theology, where he focused his learning on social justice, community development, and studied womanist theology because, quote, that's where heaven and earth meet to get stuff done, end quote. During the pandemic lockdown, Rajiv joined the pastoral team as a co-pastor with his spouse, Reverend Ronnie Rambab, who, I hope I'm pronouncing your last name correctly. I'm just doing it phonetically, but with his spouse, Reverend Bonnie Rambab, who has also been serving the church since 2016. Reverend Rajiv enjoys all kinds of music, movies, deep conversation, and is an avid Capital Public Radio and NPR listener. So why don't you go ahead and Rajiv, and you'll have 10 minutes. You don't have to use the whole 10 minutes, but we'll give you a little warning if you're getting within a couple minutes.
Thank you. Thank you for that introduction. And my prayer is that I won't come anywhere near that warning time. It's an honor to be invited to be part of this conversation, and to my esteemed panelists, I'm grateful to be here with you in this conversation. When I first got the invite and saw grace, balance, and growth, I thought, oh, grace should be easy because it's such a Christian thing. And I started digging into it again. And I was like, oh, I don't know if I like this very much. And the reason is grace in Christianity is actually quite complex and has led to some very interesting theological diversity and controversy. It's a powerful concept in and of itself. It's a powerful concept that Jesus himself never spoke about. It wasn't part of his life or his teachings or his ministry. It's argued that Jesus lived very graciously, that he offered graciousness to everyone around him. He broke social boundaries and social norms, talked to people he wasn't supposed to talk to, hung out with people he wasn't supposed to hang out with, touched people that would defile him in the eyes of the higher ups of his tradition, and treated and embraced those that society considered less than and impure as siblings, which I think can be considered graceful living. But he never spoke about grace. So in the Christian tradition, where grace really becomes a focal point is the Apostle Paul, who's a very interesting figure and problematic and insightful. He talks about grace as this salvific device, and he contrasts grace over and over and over again, contrasts grace, this gift that he got, with his sinful nature, which in his own words, Paul is entirely undeserving of God's grace. But he got grace anyway, and that gift changed his life. And by the way, if you're not familiar with Paul, he thinks all of you are basically sinful too. But I disagree with Paul on this theological principle. And that is one of those key dividing lines in Christian theological thought that comes up around this concept of grace. Another maybe flip side to this notion of grace is one that is fairly widely discussed in society today, and that's privilege. When I was looking at grace a bit objectively, I'm like, in a way, it sounds a lot like just privilege. Like, you didn't do anything. You're not really deserving of this stuff. You didn't work for it. You just got it. Privilege. And some, particularly in my far right Christian sibling world, they say all of the stuff that they have accrued, their power and their wealth and everything, is God's gracious gift to them. I'm like, well, if you own a company, you kind of screwed over a lot of workers to get that grace, or you destroyed the environment to get that grace. And so in some ways, grace, this idea, has been leveraged to cover up some really bad behavior. And then to also make one feel good about having all these things, big bank accounts and lots of toys. So grace is complicated when you really take a look at it, and it is a beautiful thing. And I wonder if Jesus's lack of conversing about this notion of grace was because it was just a non-issue for him. And what I mean by that is you treat people decently because they deserve to be treated decently. We are all children of God. We are all lucky to have this life, even when this life brings about some suffering. To exist in this realm, to have these human fleshy experiences is a gift. It is a gift. And Jesus was like, let's do the best we can and try to make this life meaningful for everyone. And then the next concept, so apologies for leaving grace really muddled and yucky, rather than making it this wonderful thing that you can all run away with and go, Christianity is all about grace. Well, sort of. The next thing about balance, and this one actually, when I first saw it, I sort of laughed because Jesus is not a great example of balance. And Christianity as a faith tradition over the years is not a great example of balance in practice. We tend to be overworked. And in the example of Jesus, he was so bad at it that when he needed rest, he had to run away. He ran away to the hills. He was like, get away from me, get away. He didn't plan retreat time. He had to escape to get rest and recuperation. But he did that. And it is important that we do a better job and we're mindful about balance in work life, but also in the way we treat our daily living. I heard a story yesterday where this Hindu guru, and was asked this question about whether he's a vegetarian or a meat eater. Now, with the Hindu nationalist movement in India, this is a major thing because there are people that are part of this movement that are willing to kill folks who eat beef because cows are considered objectively sacred by some in those circles. So for this Hindu teacher, this contemporary Hindu teacher, to be asked this question felt a little like he was being set up, kind of like, times when Jesus was trying to be set up by some of those tricky questions. And he thought for a second and he said, we have now learned that all things, even plants, cry out in pain. We've been able to measure that. We have learned now that trees, when fruit is picked from them or they're harmed, they send signals to other trees of like kind. The predators are coming, beware. And there are these changes that take place in the plant world when they're under attack, which is us harvesting for our salads, which we lift up as an ideal way of eating, those of us that try to be health conscious. And obviously, we know animals, particularly mammals, we know that mammals are wonderful examples of empathy and cross-species compassion. And so his point was, when you eat, you are causing suffering, whatever it is that you eat. So be mindful in every moment, with everything that you choose, with every bite that you take. And I think that idea of balance and is important for us to include in our lives, whichever tradition we're in. And again, Christianity is not the greatest when it comes to teaching the practice of balance in its origins. It was a very busy faith and tradition, and we still tend to be. And then growth. I was thinking about growth, my mind went immediately to the Sermon on the Mount found in Matthew chapters 5-7. And this is a long piece of wonderful preaching, probably not all done at the same time. I mean, it's recorded that way, but it's probably an anthology of teachings of Jesus and maybe other teachers that was credited to Jesus, but powerful. I mean, it's packed. There's, the golden rule. There's the Beatitudes, where blessings are conferred upon those who are marginalized, the poor, the weak, the hungry, the lonely. Jesus is like, be salt to the world, but don't be too salty because that's no good. be light to the world. I mentioned the golden rule, love your enemies, and the Lord's Prayer. All of these things are part of the Sermon on the Mount. And when I look at that, and I sometimes refer to myself as a Sermon on the Mount Christian, because there's lots of varieties of Christian. And this one helps ground me and center me at times. And in some ways, it offers itself as a roadmap to me as somebody who's always wondering, what should I be doing in this moment? And it's a way, it's a piece of writing and sacred text that helps guide me in some decision making, and always challenges me to grow more, because everything that is contained, the direction, the inspiration, the advice, are things that I will never master in this lifetime, and always demand growth, not for material gain, but for increased human connection, purpose, and meaning in this life. So those are my thoughts on those three topics.
David, you're on mute.
Thank you very much, Rajiv, and obviously very, very much from your heart, very moving. So our next panelist is Nadia Niazi, and I'm going to do my best, Nadia, to give an introduction to you that represents all the various things that you've done. Nadia Niazi is the founder and president of Fitra, a passionate Canadian-American optimist, humanitarian, and entrepreneur. She discovered her Islamic faith in 2001 and has been a practicing Muslim ever since, which has shaped her values and her dedication to fostering inclusivity and empowerment. She has 20 years of business management experience and holds a Bachelor of Science degree from UC Davis. During her undergraduate years, she demonstrated her entrepreneurial spirit by founding Proto Vitae Inc., a biotech startup, and she managed the online e-commerce store eStylio for over a decade. Driven by her commitment to social responsibility, Nadia transformed her store and founded Fitra as a social enterprise focused on empowering vulnerable youth. By donating her store, she created a platform for young individuals to take charge of their lives and gain valuable skills and opportunities. In addition to her work with Fitra, Nadia serves as a presenter for cultural relativity, education, and teacher engagement. She provides through this organization training sessions to 5 school districts in Sacramento, equipping educators with strategies to effectively engage with youth from diverse backgrounds. So Nadia, I turn the mic over to you. Everyone else, please mute so we can hear her clearly, and go ahead.
Well, I first want to express that I'm, deeply grateful to the Interfaith Council for inviting me to be part of this really significant discussion. As we commence, I just want to humbly acknowledge that, I'm not a scholar in Islam, although I've been practicing for 2 decades now. I still feel that, I may have a lot of limitations in certain areas of knowledge. And I just ask for forgiveness for any shortcomings on my part. And I approach the discussion with an open heart, eager to learn from all of the panelists. I feel like maybe I should have gone first. So because, the knowledge and that Rajiv brings forth, I feel a little shy now coming in with my discussion. maybe not having as much prepared. So I do want to again acknowledge this, and I'll do my best, as this is my first panel in discussing this type of topic. So again, I feel pretty much the same as far as approaching this topic. I wasn't too sure if there was going to be a little more information. These are broad topics, but I do have a presentation to kind of guide me through. I did want to include maybe some verses, both from the Bible and from the Quran. I feel, and I didn't want it to not include you, Trish, but I do feel like even when I say Bible, could also pertain to the Torah, being, it's more of the Older Testament, but wanting to share kind of how we really tie together in some of these ideas. So I will share my presentation. Let's see, on this topic, and I believe you can see it right now. Yes, good. Okay. So does Islam first have a concept of grace? I thought I'd talk about that. And, when I first, a little bit about my background, because you did such a great job, David, in introducing me, and I appreciate that beautiful introduction. And you did speak about the fact that I did, find Islam. And so I didn't grow up with that background. And my background was in Christianity, and my father is Catholic. And so I have, this beautiful understanding of these two religions. And so, in talking about grace, what I wanted to talk first is that from the very inception of when I learned of Islam, is that Allah, which means God in Arabic, is introduced as the God of grace, the God of mercy. And after every beginning of a prayer worship, there's this invocation that is said by every Muslim. So if you were to walk into a mosque, if you were to listen to a Muslim say a prayer, the first thing that is said is in Arabic, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, which translate to, in the name of Allah, the most merciful, the merciful, the most merciful. These two words, which are the names, are one of the names of Allah, is what it means. The Rahman, again, these are both words that describe mercy, but it goes into like the depthness of it. So Rahman is the vastness and the owner of mercy, which is only the Almighty, and the Rahim, which is the effect of of God's mercy. So again, as we go into this, to any type of worship, we say that the owner of the vastness and the owner and the effect of this mercy, we pray in His name. So that is how we begin. And there in the Quran, God says that my mercy encompasses all things. And what that means is that God treats people with leniency and overlooks their shortcomings in an unlimited extent. But of course, I'll go into a little bit more of also what that means on the other end. But in terms of the mercy, that's what it means, encompassing all things. And as we talk about grace, it's hard not to talk about salvation, through grace. And so, Islam teaches that salvation is kind of, bestowed upon individuals through this, boundless amount of grace from God, which is granted to those who, possess a sincere inner belief and engage in righteous deeds, which is very common through the monotheistic religions, as I said, that I've studied. And, we share this conviction that the inner belief holds like an utmost importance. In Islam, we have this fundamental factor that salvation is necessary to like the combination of, but the righteous actions is very much weighed heavily upon us, and that's something that when I think of grace is what I think, and it kind of dives into the next topic of balance. So it's that salvation have that necessity of the two combination, which is the inner belief and the righteous actions. So here's where I brought a lot of the different areas in both the Holy Quran and the New Testament about balance. When I think of balance, I think of this tug of war between your inner self, where you have to live a balance between this hope and fear. Hope and fear meaning of your belief in salvation, and hoping for that mercy and grace of God, but at the same time fearing that God should take an account for our sins. So I brought some of these verses because I feel like that fear is not negated in a lot of these monotheistic religions. And so, I could read them out loud, but in the Holy Quran, God says, "Oh, you who believe, fear Allah by doing all that He has ordered and by abstaining from all that He has forbidden, as He should be feared. Obey Him, be thankful to Him, remember Him always, die not except in the state of Islam, with complete submission to God, to Allah." And there's, as I said, growing up, I felt that the same, it was that same sentiment that was taught. The fear of the Lord is the foundation of life, turning a person from the snares of death. That's in Proverbs and Psalms. Let all earth fear the Lord. Let all the people of the world revere Him. In Deuteronomy, and now Israel, what does your Lord, your God, ask of you, but to fear the Lord, your God, to walk in obedience to Him, to love Him, to serve the Lord, your God, with all your heart and with all your soul. So in the next topic of growth, this is probably my favorite to talk about because of this word that I even named our organization on, and but which, by the way, our organization is not at all, and by all means, a religious organization or political, engaging in any political stance, but Fitra just really means an innate spiritual disposition possessed by all humankinds that Islam we believe in. It aims at Islam aims at nurturing the innate potential for excellence in every human being. That's the known as Fitra. So, and the way I like to describe that is that it's like, well, first, it teaches us that the state of being is kind of that default nature. So it's like, I don't know, on a machine, a factory setting, when with that all humans are delivered in, as if you will, when you're born, you have this default position. And so when I think of growth, I think of growing towards going back to that natural disposition, growing back to where you didn't have the effects of this world, the environment, anything that's negative that's coming in, anything that is harmful to what you hear, what you see, and even what you're taught in terms of ideologies, racism, and such. And so the Quran really teaches that the most basic aspect of fitra, which is that primordial nature, is a spiritual inclination towards God. So which to me involves in expressing love and gratitude to God, and through prayer, and a continuously strive to get closer to him. And alongside this, there's a moral inclination to care for others and to do good deeds, in that balance that I had talked about. And so the spiritual and moral aspects are kind of interconnected, forming, I guess, our moral conscious, and kind of which is what makes us do the right thing, or what makes us do the right thing. And there's this beautiful saying from our prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, that righteousness is having a good character, while the sin kind of disturbs our souls and makes us not want others to know about it. And so fitra acts as an internally like a compass to guide us towards the good actions that bring us closer to our Lord. So I will end by just talking about this verse in the Quran, in terms of, how we're taught to trust this basic goodness as a core spiritual truth in Islam. And in Surah Rum, in the Holy Quran, God says, so direct your face towards the religion, inclining to truth, adhere to the fitra of Allah, upon which he has created all people. No change should there be in the creation of Allah. That is the correct religion, but most do not know. So I will end there.
Thank you so much, Nadia. That was clearly from the heart. And I think our first two panelists have had fitra just overflowing. So it wasn't really hard to fill the 10 minutes because it just poured right out. And I'm sure that it will be illuminating for us to hear from Trish. So let me give Trish's introduction, and then we'll turn the microphone over to her. Dr. Trish Blaine is a member of the Baha'i Faith. She has served the faith at the local, national, and international levels. Currently, she's a member of the Sacramento Baha'i community. Dr. Blaine received her master's and PhD degrees in history from Arizona State University. She has taught for Arizona State University, South Texas College, University of Oklahoma, and California State University at Sacramento. She holds degrees in communications and education. Prior to entering academia, Dr. Blaine worked in advertising and public relations for 17 years. Her love, however, is history, especially women's history and the history of the U.S. West. So, Dr. Blaine.
Thank you so much. Yes. I have to voice too that it is an honor to be included among these panelists, and I thank you for that. What a great concept, generous listening. That is so lovely. So I'm going to pull up a PowerPoint, if I may. Can everyone see it? Is it there? All right. So let me move some things around so I can, oh, never mind. All right, so. All right, so like the others have kind of voiced, I thought grace, balance, and growth. Oh my gosh, what do I do with this? So this is what I put together in terms of a Baha'i perspective. So just in case there's anyone out there that's not familiar with the Baha'i faith, I've done a one-slide introduction to the Baha'i faith. Baha'u'llah is our prophet founder. You can see he lived in the 19th century. He is the latest in the line of manifestations or prophets of God. He brought a new revelation from God to mankind. I'll also refer from time to time to Abdul-Baha in terms of some of the quotations I have. He was the son of the prophet. He oversaw the spread and development of the faith after his father's death. He died in 1921. So Baha'i beliefs address such essential themes as the oneness of God and religion, the oneness of humanity, freedom from prejudice, progressive revelation of religious truth, the fundamental equality of the sexes, the harmony between religion and science, the centrality of justice to all human endeavors, the importance of education, and the dynamics of the relationships that are to bind together individuals, communities, and institutions as humanity advances toward its collective maturity. Now we have, I've got to move that again. Baha'i faith is in over 180 countries. Our holy writings have been translated in over 80 languages. All right, so let me look at the concept of grace. So Abdul-Baha tells us that just as the reality of divinity is limitless, likewise his grace and bounties are limitless. So he tells us that God's grace is like the rain that comes down from the heaven. The water is not bound by limitations of any form, yet on whatever place it pours down, it takes on limitations, dimensions, appearance, shape. In the same way, the holy essence of the Lord God is boundless, immeasurable, but his graces and splendors become finite in the creatures because of their limitations, not because of God's limitations. So we're told, consider not thy capacity. Don't think about who you are and your limitations and merits. Rather consider the grace of thy Lord, the clement, the merciful. Verily thy Lord confirmeth whosoever he willeth of his servants through the glad tidings of the kingdom, the signals of clemency and spiritual fragrances. So we're told repeatedly we should not look at the smallness of our receptacle or, oh my gosh, I can't do this, I can't do that, but rather focus on the grace of God will give us in order to do the things that we need to do. So balance, oh my goodness, how can we find balance in the chaos that surrounds us? Abdul-Baha told us something that is very important. He says, as ye have faith, so shall your powers and blessings be. And he tells us this is the balance. This is the balance. This is the balance. So the Baha'i teachings don't call for blind faith, but a faith born of conscious knowledge. This implies that we must investigate and decide for ourselves what we're going to believe. In other words, we can't just take our religious beliefs on tradition or because our parents told us so, but as individuals, we've been given the gifts and abilities and the talents to be able to investigate for ourselves and make those determinations. We know the sacred scriptures of the major religions of the world all speak of a day when peace will reign on earth. In itself, this is rather remarkable considering the differences in some of the different doctrines and then how in the world we're going to get there. I'm having to move some things around here. This speaks to God's faith in humanity. I just find this such an incredible idea that God has faith in us. And so he knows he's going to give us the guidance. He tells us how to do it. He gives us the tools and then says, go do it, because he has faith in us. One day, those major religions promise, we will figure it out. But to do what we must, oops, sorry. Trying to move this little panel around while I do this. But to do that, we must first understand our true nature. Even Euripides tells us the best and safest thing is to keep a balance in your life. Acknowledge the great powers around and in us. If you can do that and live that way, you're really a wise man. So further on balance, life is a balancing act. We all strive to find the perfect balance in our lives. Because we exist, I'm sorry, and I'm trying to move stuff on the outside the same time I'm doing this. Life's a balancing act. We all strive to find that perfect balance in our lives. Because we exist with one foot in the physical world and one foot in the spiritual world, awareness of this fact makes it much easier to grow and develop. Pierre Teilhard de Chardin tells us we are not human beings having a spiritual experience. We are spiritual beings having a human experience. And I know we've all heard this many times, but if we understand our essence is spiritual, and whatever else happens is beyond that realm of spirituality. So finding balance is finding faith. Faith in humanity, inspired by religious traditions, each pointing toward greatness and peace on earth. The very act of increasing our awareness of the need for the balance between equal material and spiritual progress further solidifies the reality that the establishment of peace on earth is not out of reach. It is something we can attain. I remember years ago, one of my sons saying that, people who say, oh, peace is just, we'll never get to peace. That's just pie in the sky. And my son's response was, war is really easy. Peace is the one that we're going to have to figure out that's going to be hard for us to come by. Again, Abdu'l-Baha, it is indeed a good and praiseworthy thing to progress materially, but in so doing, let us not neglect the more important spiritual progress and close our eyes to the divine light shining in our midst. So now we've got to think about growth. So the point of this, that to gain control over physical bodies is an extremely easy matter, but to bring spirits within the bonds of serenity is a most arduous undertaking. This is not the work for everybody. It necessitates divine and holy potency, the potency of inspiration, the power of the Holy Spirit. Abdu'l-Baha tells us the soul comes into being at the time of conception. It gradually acquires divine qualities, but there comes a time when it has to produce its fruit. Not until the soul reaches this point can it be said to have fulfilled its destiny. If it chooses the material world, I did it again. If it chooses the material world as a partner, then the child will develop a materialistic way of life that deprives the soul of its spiritual heritage. And many people in the world allow themselves to fall in love with material things. Consequently, the soul is impoverished. And although it is a spiritual entity, it becomes sullied with worldly affections and gives birth to materialism, an offspring unworthy of its high station. So does human civilization grow, mature, and develop, or do we remain stagnant? When we look back at history, can we truly say the human race has progressed? So there are historians and philosophers who ask these questions lately, and some who focus on the negative aspects of our material advancement and even conclude that human progress is an illusion or a myth. But you know, it's hard to deny the individual progress, deny that it exists. Just think about every child who's ever gone to school. They know how it feels to make progress. So the Baha'i teachings say that kind of inner progress ultimately comes from a divine power. Again, Abdu'l-Baha tells us man must throughout all the degrees of life evolve and progress day unto day, for life is continuous. The manifestors or the prophets of God of the divine law have appeared so that they may confer upon man an ideal power which will enable him to advance along all the degrees of human attainment. The power of the world of existence is limited, while the power of God is unlimited. If the reality of man should not be confirmed by a divine power, human progress would terminate. So the need for religion is endless. We can't do it on our own. So if we are true Baha'is, we say speech is not needed. Our actions will help in the world, will spread civilization, and will help the progress of science and cause the arts to develop. Without action, nothing in the material world can be accomplished. Neither can words unaided advance a man in the spiritual kingdom. It is not through lip service only that the elect of God have attained to holiness, but by patient lives of active service, they have brought light into the world. Now, people, bear with me for just a moment. I'm going to try to bring up a song. I'm going to stop that one and I will share something else. What happened to my, go. Okay, give me a second because it seems to have disappeared. So give me a second. There it is. Now this runs about 4.5 minutes, but I'm only going to make you watch it for about 2 because, as you can imagine, it repeats. So here we go.
We're not hearing any music.
All right. I thought I hit the. All right. Excuse me just a minute here. Yeah, I think I'm almost there. All right, let's try it again.
Strive that your actions day by day may mean beautiful prayers.
Is that better? Can you hear it now?
Yeah.
Yes, we can hear it.
Strive that your actions day by day may be beautiful prayers. Turn towards God and seek always to do that which is right and noble. Enrich the poor, raise the fallen, comfort the sorrowful, bring healing to the sick, reassure the fearful, rescue the oppressed, bring hope to the hopeless, shelter the destitute. Strive that your actions day by day may be beautiful prayers. Turn towards God and seek always to do that which is right and noble, enrich the poor, raise the fallen, comfort the sorrowful, bring healing, reassure the fearful, rescue the oppressed, bring hope to the hopeless, shelter the destitute. Strive.
We're going to end it there. All right. Thank you for your time and attention.
Thank you so much, Trish. There's obviously so much within your tradition that the world needs. Now we've come to the time when we, on the panel, can ask each other questions. And so if any of you have questions for anyone else on the panel, you can go ahead. In the meantime, I would invite our audience to put questions for the panel members into the chat. And I will read some of the questions. I can't guarantee I'll get to all of them after the panelists have had a chance to ask each other questions. So do any of you have questions for each other about what was said or traditions and so on? Go ahead, Rajiv.
Yeah, this isn't so much a question, but it's this first one is to Nadia. This idea of fitra, I don't know where I've been this life of mine to have not come across this concept. I know Muslim people. I've done a fair amount of reading, and this has just escaped my notice, and it's really beautiful, and the way you presented it is great. Can you say a little bit more about how this concept, this recognition of innate spiritual disposition has impacted your kind of the day-to-day life?
Sure. And I appreciate you asking this question. And again, I feel honored to talk about it. I feel I feel the same way as when I first heard the concept. And whenever I speak about it, I feel like anyone in any different various religions just really connect to this idea. But I feel on a daily basis, it's always a reminder that we are good, we are innocent, we are pure, and we have to strive towards going back to that state that we were born in. So fitra does just mean this natural disposition, and to know that what is it that got us there really makes you make the right choices, whether you want to, listen to less maybe provocative music that is out there. And this is what I teach the youth because, I do run a program. And, there's a lot of things that we do on a daily basis that kind of puts us on different tracks in life, right? Different paths. And so it's just a constant reminder that we are all good. There's so much good in this world, and that we just have to continuously strive to get back. And And then on a spiritual level, it's the learning and teachings of how do we do that? How do we get back, and how do we get to the closeness? And on a personal level, I was drawn to Islam because these teachings of the things that we do on a daily basis, just like for instance, the simple things as the 5 daily prayers, consistently reminds you and puts you back in gear on a daily basis. And then, just going through 24 hours that you have in your life. And when you have so many things that you have to balance, that you have to stop and get back on track and reevaluate where you are. And when you do so, and you really go back into understanding how this is done, it's really amazing of how precise these things are when you follow Islam. For instance, it's a very similar prayer as it is for Christians. The daily prayer. It's really it's repeating that and asking to be guided to the right path, and also thanking. So there's a lot of gratefulness, and all this, like I said, really makes you more grounded and builds that closeness. But it's a very, very big topic. It's a very big topic, but I hope I did my best in answering that.
Well,
Thank
Nadia,
you.
what you just said is the encapsulation of grace, balance, and growth, right? You just described it. So my question that I'd like to throw to all of the panelists is, what are we balancing? What exactly is that is getting balance? Balance would imply there's some force on this side and there's some force on that side, and there might be some force coming at you or pushing you to fall over. So what are those forces that knock us off that we need to be balanced? And for what goal? What's the goal of being balanced? When you're balanced, what happens? Anyone want to respond first? Well, what are the forces? When we're saying, my idea of balance is might be shown in a metaphor of the transcontinental airplanes, and they usually go on autopilot. And so when they're on autopilot, they don't actually go straight to where they're supposed to land. What they do is they fly, and then the computer checks the direction that they've flown and it corrects them. And then they fly a little bit more, and it checks whether they're on course, and it corrects it again. And so, in fact, when you're on an intercontinental flight, you're zigzagging, really. It's, it's not the way they draw it on the map. You're really you're zigzagging, correcting, zigzag, correct, zigzag, correct. And that's how you get to your goal, so that you're not thrown off course. And to me, that is a little bit like our life. And so in order to correct and get back, we need the process of balancing the forces that have thrown us. And that's just a metaphor, but what I'm throwing out to the panel is, what are those forces? Are they outside forces, inside forces? Where are they coming from?
The thought that came to mind, Mama Ruby Sales is a longtime civil rights worker, advocate, has done a number of nonprofit things, and she continues to teach and guide people. And she says, we are living in a capitalist technocracy where human life doesn't matter and Black Lives Matter least of all. And in thinking about that, and I think one of the things when we talk about balance in our contemporary 2023 society in the United States of America, we're thinking about things that really don't need to be balanced. You know, the image of plate spinners comes to mind. You know, we're spinning all these things to keep up with the Joneses or whoever. And if we stopped spinning plates and let them all fall, we'd probably be just fine. And realize we've known how to balance, as Nadia said, since we were born. And then we find the real meaning and purpose. And in some ways, I think the pandemic lockdown helped us reconnect to some of that, because we were forced to let a lot of those spinning plates fall. And we found out that what mattered most was our connection to our loved ones. And we missed people, and we longed to be together, maybe over a little bit of food and drink. And that's really the ultimate in many ways. So I would say balance is already in us. We've just been conned by all the lures of consumerism that we are out of balance.
You know, I want to second what Rajiv has said. And I think when we think about, you know, what are those negative forces that are, you know, pushing on us? And particularly we're talking about in today's world and today's United States. And there are things like materialism. We can all see that. We can recognize, yes, materialism has very, very devastating consequences for us spiritually. Another is racism. Racism is one of the most fundamental evils that exist in the world, and particularly in the United States. And it is hard to recognize, to root it out, because it's very, very complex. It's very deeply rooted. We are founded as a nation in racism. And another one of those factors is nationalism. You know, it's wonderful to have pride in our countries, and we should all be patriotic. But as the world has gone, we've all gotten, you know, we've gotten into our little countries, our little corners, and said, you know, mine's better than yours. And by gosh, we'll fight about it. You know, so I think all of these things are such negative forces. And sort of related to what Nadia is saying, not exactly, but similar, that Baha'u'llah tells us that, you know, we are born noble. We are not creatures that are born, forgive me, Christians, in original sin. Human beings are born noble, and we have tremendous dignity. And these are gifts. These are gifts inherent in us that help us recognize and perhaps fight off or fend off those extremely negative forces in our society, like materialism and racism. You know, so there are, you know, those negative forces that are just, you know, pounding on us day in and day out. And it seems like every time we try to raise our heads up and say, oh no, you know, we're smashed back down. But fortunately, if we think about it, at least we've come much, much further, or we're further ahead than we were 50 years ago, or heaven knows 400 or 500 years ago. But you know, the struggle continues.
So I'll follow up with that by also mentioning again, this was said by all of you, but the connection, you know, it's, yes, like what is it that what are the forces, but it's what is preventing us from being connected to you know, to God, essentially. So we have to look at and step back and say, you know, think of that and saying there's a lot of noise, a lot of things, not only you know, what we're striving for, you know, this material world that we're talking about, but also what is it that, essentially is preventing us from just being connected. Because once we're connected, we do become different people, and so that's where we have to also step back and realize, like, what could we do to get more connected? And I agree that, COVID was a point where a lot of us stopped and said, okay, being isolated sometimes and having moments of isolation actually could be beneficial, where you can stop and think about other things and go back to rudimentary things like appreciating nature. So yeah, that's definitely essential, the connection.
And just a quick point, Trish, thank you for bringing up the original sin idea. Just want to say that is a Western Christian construct. It is not original to the Christian faith, and it's not part of the Eastern traditions of Christianity.
Thank you for clarifying that. I grew up Catholic. I've been a Baha'i my whole adult life, but I grew up Catholic, so
Sure.
I'm very familiar with the whole idea of original
Oh
sin.
yeah, and I grew
Indelible
up.
marks on our souls, and I mean, it's just it's tragic that human beings.
I grew up in a
believe this,
fundamentalist Christian faith too, so yeah.
Well, and that human beings believe this about what their essential essence is, that their essence is negative, and that's one thing I wanted to say about, what do we do about it? And I mean, there are many answers and there are no answers, but part of it is building community. Everywhere you look and you ask people and they say, connect in our neighborhoods with our neighbors, and build a community. And this is certainly one way. It's one tool we have of bringing people together, and we can form many kinds of different communities. Perhaps this is a community here, and my neighbors and I make up a community, but the whole concept of community building, is very useful and I think pertinent right now. Probably always has been.
Right. Well, I wonder, since we're saying that at least those on the panel, myself too, are saying that these forces, some of which are inside of us, they're not cultural or national, they're actually inside of us. If they're not indelibly original, how do we get them? And why do we tolerate them? I think everyone has some prejudice. Everyone judges people before they get to know them. Everyone has ideas about people outside of their family that are different than their ideas of people that are inside their close family. So where do those come from, and what can we do about them? What do our faith traditions tell us? Maybe that's not a clear question. I see sort of blank looks, and that makes me think I didn't ask it clearly. I guess what I'm saying is
I'm
that
confused.
the evidence is that sometimes we do things that aren't kind or aren't patient or aren't just, even though we're trying to be kind and patient and just. So where do the gears slip, and what are the things that we can work on so that we're approaching more of the ideal? In Islam, there's this concept of insan kamil, the perfected human being, and we're trying to get closer to that, trying to be more like the prophets, like Jesus or Muhammad or other people. So what do we do about those things that make us, that cause us from inside to do things that our ideals say are not correct?
Well, I would love to speak to that. As I mentioned when I was talking about balance, is that again, Muslims do believe in the balance between the hope and the fear, the hoping of the mercy and grace of God, but at the same time fearing that, that we should be taken account for our sins. And so this is something that for me on a daily basis, when I make my decisions, is to always have that in mind. So it all goes back to, what your belief is in terms of, do you fear God or not? I think that as Muslims, we are taught the fear, which makes us strive and not be lazy in terms of our choices. Because if we didn't think about it, then if we only thought about the grace and the mercy, we're most likely as humans start deviling into, being more lazy in terms of making those poor decisions. And so that having that balance and reminders that, we are going to all have to be accounted for the choices we make, right? And that, that fear is not negated.
Thank you, Nadia. Anyone else?
I think ego has a lot to do with it. That's not particularly a Christian concept. I mean, it's much later, but some of you are probably familiar with the Course in Miracles, which speaks about this quite a bit. And we just get caught up with ourselves and other people, maybe more so than anyone else. The people that we love the most irritate us the most. And we just, like our kids, our spouses, partners, we want to be left alone. Oftentimes I'll joke, they're like, what do you want for your birthday? To be left alone. Just everybody leave. And so I just think, but part of that comes from this idea that we don't have healthy self-love. And this notion, I don't mean arrogance or, whatever, but a healthy self-love, because that idea of original sin or being corrupt to the core, when Jesus offers a teaching like love your neighbor as yourself, well, if you think you're garbage, you're going to think your neighbor's garbage too. That's a really difficult starting point. But a healthy self-love, which includes disciplined discernment about how you're moving and living and relating in the world, and constantly evaluating, and then really liking the progress that you're making and who you're trying to be, because then you can identify with others who are trying also. And rather than criticize or be irritated, you cheer yourself and others on towards these healthier versions of us.
Thank you, Rajiv. Trish, did you have anything?
I just have just two comments. One, how do we combat those forces? And I think one of them is called prayer, and certainly Islam embodies this. And as Baha'is, we have obligatory prayers that we have to say every day, and throughout, but the other concept in this also is very close to what Nadia is saying, is that as Baha'is, we're told to bring ourselves to account every day. Lest, death come upon us unannounced. So in other words, at the end of the day, we should think, well, how's my day been? And well, if I did something really well, really good, then I should thank God for helping me do that. And if I fell down somewhere, I should ask for forgiveness and help to do better. But this whole idea of, bringing ourselves to account helps us constantly think about who we are, where we are, and what our relationship is to the world. And of course, a huge element of that is prayer.
Thank you, Trish. Well, we have some questions from our audience, And the first one I'm going to ask is for Trish, although anyone can jump in. Someone asked, is balance more about moderation? I guess that's the question. Is balance mostly about moderation, Trish?
I guess that's a good question. I'm not sure, moderation. I mean, that's a whole other topic too. Baha'u'llah always, tells us that we should, engage in moderation. And so I suppose, if we're really in implementing it in moderation in our lives, I suppose that does bring us a level of balance. That's the first thing off the top of my head that I think about. Moderation has so many implications in so many ways. But, if we take the moderate path rather than, the extremes, sometimes, we're supposed to be, in good stead, by moderation. So if that equates to balance, I suppose it could, but that's a very superficial answer.
Well, I'd like to put something in here that's occurred to me, and that is that balance for me is the thing that helps me get to the goal that I'm here for. So again, the idea of flight, if you have a bird and it has two wings, the wings help it go up and down. They help it go forward and up and down, but it can't actually help. They don't help it land in the right place. In order to get on a branch, it has to have the tail feathers. It has to slow itself down, put the legs out, and to actually get where it's trying to land. And for me, so that those tail feathers are what allow it to balance. Otherwise, it would just be shooting here and it might miss where it wants to land, or it might go too low and land before it, and so on. But you need something that will keep you on track. And that thing is balance, because we're not in control of the world around us. We're not even completely in control of our feelings and thoughts. So we're going to, we need something that will help guide us like that. And Trish brought up prayer. There are other things that can help us balance, keeping in the goal of being a good human being in mind. So you have some ruler to measure your thoughts and actions against. Various spiritual teachings can help, but the idea is to get to a particular place. To me, sometimes in our society, we're talking about, well, how many times you get to the gym, and whether you eat too much meat or not enough meat, or you don't eat your vegetables. And that's really it's not getting to a goal. It's talking about the process. But all the things that help us to become better human beings and our communities to becoming better communities, those are the things that are balancing us out to get to our goal of being manifestations of that goodness. Just my comment. Any other point about balance?
David, I wanted to react to what you said, the concept of balance, and thank you for bringing up the bird, because we like to think about the bird who has two wings, and if both wings are not fully developed and fully functioning, the bird's just going to go sideways, or it's not going to fully fly. And so whatever those two wings are, and we often use this as an analogy to the equality of women and men, that until both wings are fully developed and fully functioning, you can't have a fully developed and fully functioning human race. And we could say other, whether it's, the different races or what, as long as we don't have the bird fully developed with both wings, the human race is going to be very, very unbalanced and not able to flourish and fly as it has its inherent capabilities.
Thank you, Trish.
I would love to speak about balance. There's a time of the year for Muslims where it's a big reset. It's that big button that we reset, and that's Ramadan. I really encourage. I'm always encourage anybody to come and experience this, because it really, as a human being, is the one thing I've never felt anything else really like it. So basically, when you fast, when you do any kind of fasting, even if you do it for an entire day, it's incredibly, difficult when you're completely fasting from, sunrise to sunset without even drinking water, as a sacrifice, right? And as Muslims do it for an entire month, from sunrise to sunset every single day until the end of that month, it does a lot to you spiritually, because you completely deplete yourself of your basic need, and you slow down completely. And there's so many things that happen to you on a spiritual level when you, you do that sacrifice. And for us, when we break our fast and we start eating again, you're able to eat whatever you like. But there are people in this world that are not able to go out and get something to eat, or have that basic necessity. So really, there's so many things that are happening at that level when you really completely embark on that journey. But that is one thing that I can speak of as a way to balance our lives. I mean, it's something very drastic that we do, and it reoccurs, but it's so, I feel personally is so essential to all the things that are going on in this life. So yeah, just wanted to point
Thanks,
that out.
Nadia. Thank you.
The Baha'is also have a fast every year, 19 days, exactly as Nadia said. We fast from sunup to sundown from all food and drink. And even though it is a physical fast, it is primarily a spiritual endeavor. And you learn so much about yourself, and you have the opportunity to learn something new every time you do it, every year. So thank you for that, Nadia.
Well, we have about 6 minutes left. There is one more question that I can read, and this is for Rajiv. The questioner says, grace and bounty are two parts of Christianity. Can you explain more?
Yeah, as we talked about early on, those are also very open ended and broad ideas. So grace and bounty. And just a quick note, one of the things that I'm very conscious of in my role as a Christian minister is around Christian supremacy and certainty. So more often than not, I will lean into the gray, things that I'm wondering about, the edges, rather than offering something concrete as a way to combat Christian supremacy and this sort of the supremacy of certainty. And that's why I offered what I did about grace. Not that I don't have personal feelings about it, but things are always evolving. And in the United Church of Christ, we say, never place a period where God has placed a comma. God is still speaking. So grace, again, it is one of those things that is, like most things in sacred texts, there is a plurality of perspectives on it. I would say in my practice, it is about how I live and how I engage versus the idea that we are all undeserving and are getting this gift from God in a salvific sense, in that sort of I get to go to heaven and other people don't idea. I think the gift of grace from a cosmic sense is all around us. I mean, you look at this place we call home, like, yeah, I just can't figure out why we've messed it up so badly. I mean, God made it possible for us to be fed by trees and plants, and like, you know, we don't have to do anything. we just get out of their way. We let them grow, and literally when they're ripe, they fall. You know, they just fall, and yet we've decided to dig for things that really don't belong to us and exploit them, and on and on and on. So grace is just here. You know, we're swimming in it, and we've abused it in that sense. And then what was the other one? Abundance?
Bounty.
Yeah, you know, there's the whole the notion of scarcity versus abundance or bounty. And yeah, I think there's plenty to go around. And you know, the parable, or the miracle, depending on your perspective on the story, of the loaves and fishes, where Jesus is out there, and you know, they're out there all day long teaching and preaching, and the disciples are like, hey, people are getting hungry. And some people joke that the real miracle was men realized people were hungry and needed to feed them. And Jesus is like, well, let's gather up everything. And it turns out there was plenty for everybody. So some would see that as an actual magic miracle, where Jesus took the loaves of bread and some fish from a little boy and turned it into something big. Others would see it as the collection of people coming together, sharing in a common pot, realizing there's plenty for everybody, and there's so many baskets of food left over. And I think bounty is the orientation towards a bountiful world is deeply rooted within the Christian story and myth. And yet somehow Christianity has aligned itself with political forces that say, we got to get mine, good luck getting yours. And it's blasphemy, and it's sinful to use Christianity in that way.
Thank you, Rajiv. I think we're about out of time. And of course, for these topics, there is no time, right? So they're way bigger than 90 minutes. So I hope that our experience will carry out for everyone who was on the Zoom into their lives, into the weeks and years, and hopefully we'll be able to build more community through getting to know each other, and more insight into our own lives and the lives of those around us, and perhaps drop some of those attachments that are holding us back. So shall we close with a prayer again? In the name of God, who is compassion and mercy, all praise is for God, who is the master of the universe, who is compassion and mercy, who is the king and also the servant, the one who is the master of the last days and the first days. Give us that grace to lead us on the journey that we've started on, with an open heart back to you, and to cross the narrow path of this world and return to the great path which leads to you. Amen. Well, it's time to say good night, but not goodbye. And I hope everyone has had a worthwhile experience, and a special thanks to our panelists for such heartfelt sharings and real wisdom from your own life experiences. I think that's one of the things that is so valuable in these evenings of generous listening. And by the way, I didn't make that up. There's a wonderful doctor in San Francisco named Naomi Remen, R-E-M-E-N, if you want to look her up. And she coined the term generous listening. As far as I know, that's where I learned it. And we used it in a course with the medical students at UC Davis to try to help them get a concept of being present when other people are sharing their deepest thoughts and feelings. So time to say good night, not goodbye, and thanks again to everyone who was on the panel.